Nurse dies, returns with a shocking warning about hospitals. I thought I knew what death looked like. For 15 years, I was an intensive care unit nurse. I saw death in all its forms. The sudden, violent rupture of a life, the slow, quiet fading of a terminal illness, the frantic, failed battle on a gurney under the harsh glare of operating lights. I was proficient in its presence. I knew the signs, the sounds, the smells. I could read the diminishing numbers on a monitor like a grim prophecy, and I could detach myself enough to perform my duties with clinical precision. My world was one of science, of cause and effect, of pharmacology and physiology. My faith, such as it was a neat, tidy thing I kept in a separate compartment of my life. It was for Sunday mornings, a list of beliefs I agreed with in theory, a comforting tradition passed down through my family. My husband, David, was different. His faith was a living, breathing part of him, a constant conversation with God that I found both endearing and a little mystifying. He would pray over meals, pray for parking spots, pray for me before a long shift. I would smile and nod, but in the sterile, evidence-based world of the ICU, prayer felt like a whisper against a hurricane. I saw families crumble in our waiting rooms, their prayers rising like smoke, and while my heart ached for them, a part of me, the professional part, saw it as a coping mechanism, a psychological balm against the inevitable. The hospital, to me, was a fortress of human knowledge, our last and best defense against the chaos of mortality. I was proud to be one of its sentinels, armed with knowledge, sterile gloves, and a syringe full of science. I believed we were holding the line. I had no idea that the real war wasn't being fought on the charts or in the operating theaters. I had no idea that our fortress had no roof, leaving it wide open to a battle I couldn't see and whose existence I would have calmly and professionally denied. I was so confident in what I could measure and observe, I never once considered the immeasurable reality that was about to take me apart and put me back together in a way that would shatter my entire world. I was about to go from being the nurse to being the patient, from the observer of death to its temporary student. It happened on a Tuesday, a day of maddening, mundane normalcy. I had just finished a grueling 48-hour stretch at the hospital and was luxuriating in the simple joy of being home. David was at work, and the house was quiet. I was making a sandwich, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, feeling that particular exhaustion that is both weary and satisfying. I remember thinking about what to plant in the garden this year, a simple, earthy thought, and then a sensation like a white-hot poker being driven through my chest. It wasn't just pain, it was an explosion. My breath seized in my lungs. My legs gave out, and I crumpled to the linoleum floor, the half-made sandwich skittering across the tiles. My mind, the clinical, orderly mind of a nurse, began a frantic, useless diagnosis. Massive myocardial infarction, aneurysm, pulmonary embolism. The labels were meaningless. The pain was absolute, a crushing weight that was extinguishing my consciousness. I clawed at my chest, my fingers fumbling for my phone on the counter just out of reach. Black spots danced in my vision, growing, coalescing, swallowing the familiar comfort of my own kitchen. My last coherent thought was of David. I needed to tell him I loved him. The thought was a flare of light, and then total, suffocating darkness. The next thing I knew, there was noise. The frantic, familiar sounds of my own workplace, but heard from a terrifying new perspective. The urgent shouts, the rip of sterile packaging, the squeal of gurney wheels. I was the emergency. I was the body being rushed through the sliding doors of the ER at my own hospital, a place where I knew every shortcut and the name of every orderly. I could feel the thud of compressions on my chest, a brutal, rhythmic violence, but I felt it from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. There was a strange duality, a sense of being both in the agony and somehow, somewhere else entirely, a helpless passenger in a runaway vehicle, my own failing body. The sounds grew more desperate. I heard a voice I recognized, Dr. Matthews, a brilliant but deeply cynical cardiologist I'd worked with for years. Still no pulse. Push another amp of epi. His voice was strained, the professional calm stripped away. Another voice shouted, "She's flatlining." And with that word, I felt a final, definitive jolt, not of electricity, but of separation. The pain vanished. The chaos, the noise, the crushing weight on my chest, it all ceased in an instant. I felt a sensation of floating, of a profound and impossible lightness. I drifted upwards, like a forgotten balloon, until I was hovering near the ceiling of the trauma bay. Below me was a scene of controlled panic. I saw them all. My colleagues, my friends. There was Linda, her face pale, frantically drawing up medication. There was Dr. Matthews, his jaw tight, placing the defibrillator paddles on the chest of the body on the gurney. And I saw the body. It was my body, my own still, pale form, my hair fanned out on the pillow, my mouth slack. A strange, serene detachment washed over me. There was no fear, no grief, just a quiet curiosity. I was watching a medical drama, and I just happened to be the subject. I could hear their every word with perfect clarity. "Still a systole, let's call it." "No, wait, one more round. She's one of ours," someone pleaded. I saw David burst into the room, held back by a security guard, his face a mask of utter devastation. My heart, or what was left of it, ached for him. I tried to call out, to tell him I was okay, that I was right here, but I had no voice. Then, the scene below me began to dim, as if a filter was being placed over my vision. The bright, sterile lights of the ER faded, and a coldness seeped into my awareness. The detachment shattered, replaced by a nascent primal fear. I was no longer in the ER. I was somewhere else. I was adrift in a darkness that was more than the absence of light. It was a presence. It was thick, cloying, and utterly devoid of hope. It felt ancient and malevolent. Whispers slithered around me, formless but clear, voices of my own deepest insecurities. You were a failure. You weren't a good enough wife. Your faith was a sham. You were proud. You were empty. Each word was a shard of ice in my soul. I realized with a gut-wrenching certainty that this darkness was not empty. It was inhabited. I couldn't see them, but I could feel the entities of pure despair, drawn to the echoes of my own fear and doubt. This was the spiritual reality I had always ignored, and it was terrifyingly real. I was alone, stripped of my professional confidence, my body, my very identity. In that crushing, eternal blackness, I did the only thing I had left to do. I cried out, not with a voice, but with the last spark of my spirit, a single, desperate thought: God, help me. It was a cry from the deepest part of my being, a final admission of utter helplessness. And in that void, where no hope could exist, something answered. It began as a tiny, almost imperceptible pinpoint of light in the far distance. It was so small, yet it seemed to hold more reality than all the suffocating darkness around me. The whispering voices of despair faltered, and a new feeling began to permeate the cold, a gentle, insistent warmth. The light didn't fight the darkness, it simply existed, and the darkness could not withstand its presence. As the light grew, the shadows dissolved into nothingness. I wasn't moving towards it, but it was moving towards me, or rather, we were moving towards each other, drawn by a force more fundamental than gravity. It was a homecoming. The fear that had gripped my soul moments before melted away completely, replaced by a peace so profound, so absolute, that the word peace feels like a hollow insult to the reality of it. It was the peace of 1,000 sunsets, the peace of a mother's embrace, the peace of every right and good thing in the universe, magnified to infinity. As the light expanded, it enveloped me, and I realized it wasn't just light. It was a place. It was a consciousness. It was a being. It was pure, unconditional love, a love that knew every flawed and broken part of me and loved me not in spite of it, but because of it. I knew, with a certainty that required no proof, that I was in the presence of the divine, the source of all life, the one David had spoken to with such simple familiarity. A voice filled my awareness. It wasn't a sound that entered my ears, but a truth that bloomed in the center of my soul. It was masculine, yet feminine, powerful, yet infinitely gentle. Sarah, the voice said, and my name in that voice was a validation of my entire existence. Be at peace. You are home. You are loved. All the questions, all the anxieties, all the strivings of my life just fell away. I was known. I was safe. The love was so intense, so overwhelming, that it should have been unbearable, but it was the very thing that held me together. It was more real than the linoleum on my kitchen floor, more real than the pain in my chest, more real than the hospital I had dedicated my life to. In that moment, I understood that my entire life had been lived in a gray shadowland, and this was reality. This was the truth I had professionally ignored and privately doubted. I was home. Before we go forward, let us look back, the voice of light said, its love unwavering, and then my life began to unfold around me. It wasn't like watching a film on a screen. I was there. I was reliving moments, but with a new, shattering perspective. I experienced each event not just from my own point of view, but from the viewpoint of every person I had interacted with. I was 5 years old, crying after falling off my bike, and I felt my father's deep protective love as he scooped me up, a love I had taken for granted. I was a teenager, arguing with my mother, and I felt the sting of my sharp words from her perspective, the hurt hidden behind her stern face. Then, my career. The scenes came thick and fast. I saw myself at a patient's bedside, an elderly man frightened and alone. I was professionally kind, checking his vitals, adjusting his pillows, offering a practiced, reassuring smile. But now, I was also him. I felt his terror, his profound loneliness, his desperate need for a human connection that went beyond clinical procedure. I felt my own polite, professional distance as a cold barrier. I hadn't been unkind, but I hadn't truly been present. I hadn't offered the one thing that cost nothing, a moment of shared humanity, an acknowledgement of his spirit. I saw David, night after night, praying for me. I felt the depth and sincerity of his prayers, his pleas for my heart to soften, for me to find the relational faith he knew. I saw myself coming home, exhausted, and brushing off his attempts to talk about God, too tired for what I considered abstract philosophy. Now I felt his patient, persistent love and the small ache of his own spiritual loneliness in our marriage. I saw my Sunday faith for what it was, a sterile checklist of duties. I went to church. I put money in the offering plate. I tried not to sin in any major ways. But there was no relationship, no passion, no real surrender. My life review was not a judgment. There was no condemnation from the light, only a profound, illuminating sorrow. It was a revelation of missed opportunities, of love not given, of comfort not offered, of a connection with my Creator that had been waiting for me my entire life, which I had politely kept at arm's length. It was a mirror showing me not how bad I had been, but how much more love I was created to experience and to share. The sorrow was immense, but it was a cleansing sorrow, washed away by the continuous, unending waterfall of love that held me. When the life review was complete, I was filled with a deep regret, yet simultaneously held in a state of perfect grace. The sorrow was real, but the love was infinitely more so. You see now the currency of heaven, the being of light communicated. It is not what you achieved. It is not the knowledge you acquired, it is only love. Then, the perspective shifted again. Now, the voice said, its tone becoming more serious, more urgent. I will show you why you are here. I will show you what you could not see. Suddenly, I was looking down upon the world, and my focus was drawn to the hospital where my body lay, but I was seeing it with new eyes, spiritual eyes. The brick-and-mortar building was a shell, and inside it was a battleground of light and shadow. I saw the patients in their beds, and around many of them, I could see dark, smoky, vaguely humanoid shapes. They were beings of despair, and they clung to the sick and the fearful, whispering lies into their spirits. You will not get better. You are a burden. There is no hope. They fed on the sterile fear of the place, on the clinical despair that permeated the air. The constant beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic, the focus on only the failing body, it all created a perfect environment for these shadows to work, to isolate the human soul in its moment of greatest need. But then I saw pockets of intense, brilliant light. In a waiting room, a family was holding hands, praying not with frantic fear, but with deep, trusting faith. Their prayer was a radiant shield of golden light that surrounded their loved one down the hall, pushing back the shadows from his bedside. I saw a janitor, an elderly man I'd seen 1,000 times and never noticed, humming a hymn as he mopped the floor. He was a walking pillar of light, and as he moved down the corridor, the shadowy forms recoiled from his simple, joyful presence. I saw angels, magnificent beings of pure white light, standing beside patients. They were there to bring comfort, to wage war against the darkness, but they were often hampered. Their whispers of hope were being drowned out by the noise of the machines and the loud, faithless pronouncements of medical science. I saw a doctor tell a family, "There's nothing more we can do," and as he spoke those words of finality, the shadows around their loved ones surged, emboldened. The being of light explained, the truth settling into my soul with the weight of revelation. You have built magnificent houses for the healing of the body, but in your quest for scientific certainty, you have evicted me. You fight disease, but you ignore the spiritual war. The warning is this: a hospital that tends only to the flesh becomes a spiritual vacuum, a place where fear and despair can thrive, making true, whole healing almost impossible. You are not just treating bodies, Sarah, you are stewarding souls. The vision was overwhelming, the truth of it absolute. I saw my entire career in a new, devastating light. I had been a part of that system, a well-meaning but blind gatekeeper. My clinical detachment, my reliance on science alone, had been a closed door. I hadn't been fighting for my patients on the level that mattered most. What could I have done? I asked, my spirit weeping. I was just a nurse. I was following protocols. The voice of the light was not chiding, only full of a gentle, powerful truth. It is not about changing protocols, Sarah. It is about changing hearts, one at a time, starting with your own. It is not about grand gestures. It is in the small things where the greatest power lies. A hand held not just to check a pulse but to share strength. A word of genuine hope offered alongside a diagnosis. A silent prayer in a moment of crisis. The courage to ask a family, "May I pray with you?" You were on the front lines of a war you did not know existed. Every doctor, every nurse, every caregiver is a spiritual gatekeeper. With every interaction, you can let in the cold wind of clinical fear, or you can open a window for the light of hope. You can reinforce the lie that this physical world is all there is, or you can bear witness to the truth that a power of love is present and eager to heal. A new feeling began to crystallize within me, overpowering the regret. It was purpose, a deep, unshakable mission. I saw it all so clearly. The message was not to abandon medicine, but to infuse it with spirit, to bring God back into the hallways he had been politely asked to leave. I didn't want to leave this place of perfect love. I wanted to stay in this light forever. But the urgency of the mission was a fire in my soul. I knew I had to go back. I knew this was why I was here. I had to tell them. The voice spoke a final time, the words embedding themselves into the very fabric of my being. Go. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them the battle is real, but that my love is more real. Tell them their prayers are not empty wishes but weapons of light. You will not be alone. I am with you. Always. And with that promise, my entire being consented. I was ready. The feeling of being sent back was the violent opposite of my arrival. There was no gentle floating, no peaceful transition. It was an instantaneous, brutal pull, as if my entire spiritual essence was being threaded back through the eye of a needle. I was ripped away from the light, from the peace, from the love, and hurled back into the cold, claustrophobic confines of physicality. The first sensation was a tidal wave of agony. A searing electric fire spread across my chest, and I felt a monstrous jolt that seemed to snap every bone in my body. I was slammed back into the prison of my flesh. A breath, a huge, ragged, desperate gasp, tore through my throat. My eyelids, which felt as if they were made of lead, flew open. The world swam back into focus, blurry and painfully bright. The first thing I saw was a face looking down at me, inches from my own. It was Dr. Matthews. His mouth was hanging open, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. The professional veneer was completely gone. My God, he whispered, his voice hoarse. She's back. We have a rhythm. The sounds of the trauma bay came rushing back, but now they were different. The desperate urgency was replaced by a stunned, confused silence, broken only by the steady, miraculous beeping of the heart monitor beside me. My heart monitor. The next few days were a confusing haze of the ICU, but this time from the other side of the bed rails. I was poked, prodded, scanned, and monitored. Specialists came and went, shaking their heads, muttering about spontaneous cardiac return and statistical anomalies. They had no explanation for how a heart that had been in asystole for, as I later learned, over 20 minutes, could suddenly restart without any brain damage. David was a constant presence by my side, his hand holding mine. His face was a beautiful canvas of relief, joy, and a deep, knowing awe. He didn't need any convincing. When I was finally able to speak, I tried to tell him what happened. The words felt clumsy, insane, a pathetic attempt to describe the infinite. I talked about the light, the voice, the love. He just listened, tears streaming down his face, nodding. I know, Sarah, he said. I never stopped praying. Dr. Matthews visited me in my room. He was back to his old self, the professional skeptic, the man of science. He explained my remarkable recovery in purely medical terms, attributing it to a delayed reaction to the epinephrine and ultimately luck. You're a very lucky woman, Sarah, he said, patting my arm. I looked into his eyes and saw the wall was back up. He had seen the miracle for a split second, but his mind had already explained it away. I knew then that my journey was just beginning. It wasn't enough to have survived. I had to live the message I was sent back with, no matter how crazy it sounded. My physical recovery was slow and arduous, but it was nothing compared to the spiritual reconstruction happening within me. The world I returned to was the same, but I was irrevocably different. The sky seemed a more brilliant blue, the kindness of a stranger felt like a profound gift, and the sterile hallways of the hospital now looked to me like the front lines of an invisible war. I couldn't go back to being the nurse I was. The thought of checking vitals and administering medication while ignoring the terrified soul in the bed was now unbearable to me. The first person I truly shared the entire experience with, in detail, was David. We sat for hours, and I recounted everything: the darkness, the life review, the vision of the hospital, the mission. He listened with an open heart, his faith providing a framework for what my scientific mind was still struggling to process. His belief was my anchor, the first confirmation that I wasn't crazy. My attempt to return to work was a disaster. I walked onto the ICU floor and was almost crippled by the spiritual atmosphere I could now sense. I could feel the low-grade hum of fear, the oppressive weight of despair. I looked at my colleagues, good people doing their best, and saw them as soldiers fighting a battle with one hand tied behind their backs. I tried to talk to a few of them. My friend Linda listened politely, but then suggested I might be suffering from post-traumatic stress. Dr. Matthews avoided the topic altogether. My story was an inconvenient piece of data that didn't fit his worldview, so he chose to ignore it. But then there was Maria. She was a quiet nursing assistant from the night shift, a woman I'd barely exchanged more than a few words with over the years. She overheard me trying to explain a small piece of my story to another nurse. Later, she found me in the break room. "I heard you," she said, her voice soft. "I believe you. I pray for my patients before every shift. I see the darkness you're talking about. I feel it." We talked for an hour, two soldiers who had finally found each other in the trenches. Her validation was a gift from God, a sign that I was not alone. It was then that I knew I couldn't stay. My mission wasn't to fight the system from within, it was to speak to those outside it. I resigned from my position, a decision that baffled my superiors but felt like the most natural, necessary step in the world. My identity as an ICU nurse was gone. It had been replaced by a new, more profound identity. I was a witness. I am no longer Sarah, the ICU nurse. That person died on the kitchen floor. The person who came back is someone new, someone who has been given a second chance, not just at life, but at a reality so much deeper and more significant than the one I previously inhabited. The warning I was given in that place of light was not a condemnation of hospitals or a dismissal of the marvels of modern medicine. It was a divine course correction. It was a plea to reintegrate what we have so carefully separated, the body and the spirit. It was a reminder that true healing is not just the mending of flesh and bone, but the restoration of hope and the tending of the soul. And so, I feel compelled to speak directly to you now, to whoever is listening to my story. If you find yourself or someone you love in a hospital bed, surrounded by the beeping machines and the sterile smells, remember what I saw. You are not in a spiritually neutral place. You are on a battlefield. Do not let the clinical atmosphere intimidate your spirit into silence. Your faith, your hope, your prayers, they are not passive, last-ditch efforts. They are active, powerful weapons of light. Pray. Do not just think your prayers. Speak them if you are able. Let the sound of faith fill that room. Read scripture aloud. Play worship music softly. Anoint the room with your hope. You are a gatekeeper. You can either consent to the atmosphere of clinical fear, or you can actively invite the presence of God into that space. You can create a sanctuary of light, a shield of peace around your loved one that the shadows cannot easily penetrate, and pray for the caregivers. Pray for your doctors and nurses. They are carrying immense burdens, and most of them are fighting this spiritual war completely blind. Pray that their hands would be guided, that their hearts would be opened, and that they might become conduits of not just medical science, but of divine peace and healing. What I saw changed everything for me. It took me from a life of compartmentalized belief to a life of integrated faith. My terror in the darkness was real, but the love I found in the light was infinitely more real. My hope, my mission, is that by sharing my story, it might change things for you too. It is my prayer that you will see every challenge not as a purely physical event, but as an opportunity to invite the most powerful, loving force in the universe to be present, to be active, and to bring true, holistic healing where it is needed most.